I am so glad you're here today. My name is Sarah Boreen, and I'm with Living Well at Texas A&M, the Employee Engagement and Wellbeing Program. This is the very last day of our summer programming, and I couldn't think of a better program and a better presenter to have than the program we're about to learn about today and engage in, called Your Areas of Genius, with Bailey Lenzen, a wonderful coach and facilitator who I have done a lot of work with personally and professionally, and she is just amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Bailey and then go ahead and turn it over to her. So as a retreat facilitator and leadership coach, Bailey Lenzen guides teams in building trust and developing practices to ensure team effectiveness. In addition to leading team retreats, she facilitates workshops on topics such as Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, personal and organizational values and mission statements, giving and receiving feedback, as well as goal setting. Bailey is an associated certified coach and Hudson Institute internal coach for Texas A&M University. She received her Master's of Education from UT Austin and her BBA from Mays Business School. And she currently lives in Bryan with her husband and son. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Bailey Lenzen. Thank you, Bailey.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that lovely introduction. And as Sarah mentioned, I really enjoy working with Living Well, and of course, all of the wonderful people that work at Texas A&M. I worked at A&M for a few years, and as you heard, still live in town. And so I enjoy doing a lot of team building with all sorts of teams across the university and outside of it in the education industry. I am introducing to you all today a model for consideration for you for what might help your team, your work group, to work together better and understand one another more. This tool isn't to replace other assessments that you may have taken before, Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder, Enneagram. It really is a supplemental tool that will help you think about specifically areas of work and areas of genius as it relates to work. And so from there, we will get started. You'll see, I'm going to start with just asking you, you signed up for this workshop, you're here for some reason, and I'm curious what that reason is. And so in the chat is a link, or you can just type it into your browser for Menti. So we'll be using this platform for you guys to just type in a couple responses here at the beginning and end. And so the website is ment.com. And then when you get there, you'll enter this code on the screen. You can do this either on your browser or on your phone. And then you'll just tell me a little bit of why you're here today. And that way I can get to know you a little bit, and we can learn kind of what everybody else is here to learn as well. And as you guys are getting comfortable and loaded up on that platform, you are also welcome to use the chat in Zoom for questions as well. And Sarah will help me to pay attention to the chat. I'm happy to take questions throughout as we go along. You can't interrupt me. I am happy to answer any questions as we go. Definitely seeing a lot of self-awareness, but also awareness of other answers coming in. Somebody is already listening to the podcast on Working Genius, the assessment behind what we're doing today. That's awesome. It's definitely a good resource if you're a podcast person. And seeing also some answers on how it will help you develop as a leader. And for sure, if you're interested in developing your leadership skills, understanding other people better and having some common language can definitely help to do that. This assessment, I'll tell you guys, is relatively new to the market. And so previously, I would say I was pretty strongly only introducing Myers-Briggs to teams, but I think this one is a good pair with some other assessments out there on the market for that specific reason of how, when I bring people onto my team, how do they fit in based on who else is already on the team and their gifts. Well, thanks everyone for sharing your answers. The way you can interact with this platform in the bottom right is you can like slides when you want, but no worries, you don't need to necessarily interact with the slide, but it is there. And like I said, feel free to interact with the chat as well. Here are my goals for today, now that you all have shared your intention for our time together. One is I want to simply introduce you to these 6 types of work here shortly. And I want to, through introducing those to you, help you to consider and make a guess on what your working geniuses, competencies, and frustrations are. Of those 6, you would have 2 in each of those 3 categories. There is an official assessment, which definitely I would say that's what you should go do in order to officially know. But at least by introducing them to you, you can absolutely take a guess for yourself and maybe somebody else that you work really closely with. And lastly, this assessment is really not meant to be used as a vacuum of just you learning about you. I think other assessments are probably better fits for that, but it is specifically meant for, okay, who do I work with most often? And how do we work together better? That really is the key underlying purpose of this model and assessment. So that's what our intention is for this hour together. I'm sure if you guys have anything else to add, I'll be happy to incorporate that as well. Underneath this model of working genius, it is answering 2 questions. What gives you energy and what depletes you of energy? No matter whether you're at work, working on a project with your coworkers, or you're planning a vacation with your family, all of that is work, and it includes probably some work that you enjoy and some work that you don't enjoy as much. And Working Genius breaks that down a little bit into 6 types of work. Those 6 types of work are wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. And so we're going to walk through these 6 types of work, define what they each are and what they maybe look like played out in reality. The graphic you see on the screen is key. This graphic is, we're going to analyze why they chose this methodology of displaying it and how we can better understand the types of work, their relationships with one another as a result of that. As you can see, it's a helpful acronym widget if that helps you to remember the flow of the 6 types of work as we go along as well. The assessment behind our work today is called the Working Genius. And so what does Working Genius mean? Working Genius is really talking about an area that comes naturally to you and gives you energy. The assessment breaks down, of those 6 types of work, you have 2 geniuses, and that no one can embody all 6 types of those geniuses. And that in addition to 2 types of genius, everyone has 2 competencies, 2 areas that you can do fairly well, but you would get trained if you had to do it all the time. Finally, that you also have 2 areas that are more frustrations for you. This would be things that drain you, either because you're not good at it or because you don't enjoy it, or both even. I love the metaphor of a coffee cup for really understanding the difference between these 3 things. If you think of a cup of coffee that's got a lid on it, it stays hot for quite a long time. And it therefore maintains its effectiveness for a long time. And that's what's happening when we're using our geniuses on a regular basis. We're that coffee cup with the lid on top, stays hot a long time. A competency you might think of as just taking the lid off. So it's still hot, still effective, but just doesn't stay hot as long as when the lid was on. But it still can do absolutely a good job at what it is intending to do, of giving you energy and giving you sustenance for getting through your day, right? The last piece though, that I think really helps to understand the frustration piece is imagine just poking a small tiny hole in that coffee cup at the bottom. And slowly that coffee is not going to last very long, right? And so that really is the area of frustration that, yep, it's still there. You can do it. That's the idea behind a frustration, but you are going to have a lot more work to do to maintain energy if you're constantly having to use an area of genius that is a frustration to you, meaning it drains you or you just don't enjoy it. So that's the 3 types. And as we go along, I'll introduce you to the 6 types, and you can maybe guess which of those 6 types where you would fall for each of those 3. Before we jump in, I want to make sure, just reemphasize, this assessment really is, it's not meant just for you. It's meant for you to consider using with the people that you work with so that you guys can understand together, here are the things we do well. Here's where there's a lot of abundance of genius for our team or work group. And here's where we have maybe a lot of frustration as a team. And that can open up a lot of good conversation for a team or a work group as to how can we work together better, and maybe the frustrations we feel collectively could be more clearly seen through this kind of a language and lens. If you have questions on that before we jump in, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I will also caveat this assessment really, when I'm saying it's good to help with your teams, I'm thinking size 2, anywhere from 2 people working together to 8-ish. It gets beyond 8, it's probably a lot to consider for the whole group, but it's probably, yeah, 2 to 8 is probably the key amount you would want for a group to use this assessment. The other piece of why it can help a team is in really helping teams figure out how can we increase productivity, increase morale, and reduce burnout. Emphasis on figuring out what those frustrations are can help fix that burnout issue. And then the opposite, thinking about where we really get a lot of energy, can help with the productivity and morale piece. With that, let's get started in what each of the 6 types of work are. First is the genius of wonder. Now, this genius is probably not the most observable to other people because it really is an internal process. It's about pondering and asking questions, asking why things are the way that they are. And people with this genius derive joy and energy from thoughtfully observing their environment and wondering if there might be a newer, a different, or a better way. So their question they maybe lead with internally is there a better way? So that's the genius of wonder. Our second genius is the genius of invention. Oh, also, I will share as we're going along that each of these geniuses has something they more so crave and something that they're more so, quote, crushed by or hurt by, frustrated by, whatever word you want to use there. So the people with the gift of wonder crave consideration and are crushed by somebody saying, who cares? So then the second genius is the genius of invention. This genius is about coming up with novel ideas and solutions to solve problems and address issues. It involves somebody that's probably creative, has an original thinking, often doesn't need a lot of direction, and they're confident and inspired by a problem that has no apparent solution. If you recognize this thought that you've had about somebody else, where does she come up with those ideas? What you're probably referring to is someone that has this genius. They're constantly coming up with new ideas and new ways of thinking that no one else maybe had thought of. So that's the genius of invention. They crave freedom and are more crushed by constraint. Our third genius is the genius of discernment. These folks assess the merit and workability of an idea or a solution, and they're good at pattern recognition, integrative thinking, And when you think of somebody with this kind of a mentality, you might be able to identify somebody with discernment. She'll know what's good or bad about your idea. Or somebody where you've said, he has really good judgment and taste when it comes to just about anything. They're a person who, no matter what it is that you're facing, you can go to them and they can help you think through an issue, think through whether an idea will work for a problem that you have. That's somebody with the gift of and genius of discernment. They crave trust and they are crushed by somebody asking them to prove it. That brings us to our next genius, the genius of galvanizing. These people are really about rallying and motivating others around, that could be around projects, ideas, initiatives. They derive the joy and energy from inspiring, persuading others to take action to get things moving, even if that means convincing them to change their plans. People that are good at galvanizing, oftentimes they also have to re-galvanize groups when energy is lost and momentum is fading. They can be good at even doing that. Again, when you're thinking about somebody else and identifying it in them, there'd be somebody where you might say, she'll really stir up momentum when we need it. Or you can count on him to get us going. That's the genius of galvanizing. They crave reaction and are crushed by apathy. All right, that is our fourth genius. Now we're on to our fifth genius of enablement. This genius involves in answering the call to action and seamlessly providing others with the unconditional support and assistance they need. These people have a gift and derive joy from providing others with something specifically to get started. So they're really ideal team players in a lot of ways, and they often contribute to higher morale on a team. When thinking about these people, they might be somebody where you would say, I don't know what we would do if he wasn't a part of this, or she really knows how to make things happen. That's somebody with the genius of enablement. They crave appreciation and are crushed by being overlooked. That brings us to our final genius, the genius of tenacity. This is really about execution. This picture really helps you to envision what it is. They're the finish line people. They are good at getting things done, achieving results, realizing the desired impact of a project or task, and they like crossing things off a list and knowing they have met standards of completion. How you might recognize this in somebody else is you say, I don't think she's ever missed a deadline, or he doesn't want to hear any excuses, or don't get in her way. She's going to do whatever it takes to get it done. People with the genius of tenacity crave clarity and are crushed by ambiguity. So that is your brief overview of the 6 types of work. And what I'd like to do now that you've seen them all as individuals is provide you a visual for how you might quickly see how they all interact one to one and amongst the others as it relates to, like I said earlier, planning a project or planning a vacation, whatever it may be. Wonder identifies the need for change. Then invention creates the solution. Discernment evaluates and refines that solution. Galvanizing rallies people for action. Enablement answers the call to action. And finally, tenacity makes sure that the work gets accomplished. Let me pause there and ask if anyone needs me to repeat, go back, share more on any of those 6 geniuses that weren't clear. You can pop it in the chat or anything as we go. Courtney wants to know, what was the enablement area crushed by? Let me go back to that. Being overlooked. And then the genius of wonder, they are really good at saying, is there a better way? Is there a better way? So they're really good at just looking and pondering and asking the questions that need to be asked. I often think of somebody with the genius of wonder as they're the person that starts a meeting and reminds everyone, what's the big picture? Why are we having this meeting? Why are we here? Versus maybe just jumping straight into the work, right? That can be very, very helpful for us to get on the same page about what we're even doing here today. And then what was the crave and crush for invention? We go back there. They crave freedom and are crushed by restraint. Okay, so I'm going to introduce y'all to a next layer of ways to look at this flow of work. If you notice, there's some that are layered on top and some that are layered on bottom. And the way Lencioni, who created this assessment, Patrick Lencioni at the Table Group, he created this in this way, he and his team, because he noticed that these geniuses on top, he calls more responsive, and these geniuses on bottom are more disruptive. So the way you might think about that is the people on bottom that have a genius or both geniuses there, they're really inciting an action that the geniuses on top are then responding to, right? So invention creates a solution. Discernment is responding to that by really refining that idea, right? So they're an important piece there. Same thing with enablement. They're answering the call to action that was provided and put out there by the galvanizer. Another one that you can look at as you're looking at the flow of work is through the more vertical lens. The first two geniuses are really the ideation stage of work. The second two are the activation stage of work. And finally, the last two are more of implementation. I have activation in red because Lencioni talks about how oftentimes we think of projects as moving from ideation to implementation, and we forget the important middle steps of discernment and galvanizing, and that really work can't happen effectively unless those middle two things happen, that ideas are refined and made better, and that we make sure everybody really is excited and fully on board before we move to actually making that idea happen. So ideation, activation, implementation is another way to look at how the flow of work happens. I'm going to introduce one other way of looking at this that will hopefully help you guys learn the 6 steps a little bit better as well. So think of it as a conversation. Wonder says, is there a better way? Invention says, I have an idea. Discernment says, I think we have to tweak that plan before it's ready. Galvanizing says, who's ready to help us make that program work? Enablement says, I'm on board to make that happen. And tenacity ends by saying, okay, let's wrap it up so we can send it to the board by tonight's deadline. So you can really see the flow of work through that conversational lens there. An analogy that I also think can help you understand this flow of work is by thinking of wonder and invention as more of that 30,000, 25,000 foot lens. And as we move through that flow of work towards tenacity, that tenacity is probably more that 5,000 foot to ground level. So you can also think of it that way as you're thinking about your own geniuses and frustrations and those that you work with closely. Now, that brings us to providing you a little bit of time for you to think about what could be, if just hearing a very, very brief overview, having only 10-15 minutes to really digest it. And again, happy to repeat anything you need me to do. But what would you guess are your geniuses, competencies, and frustrations? Again, genius being things that come quite naturally to you, competency being something you operate fairly well in, but would get drained if you had to do it constantly, and a frustration, something that drains you because you don't enjoy it or you're not good at it or both. And I will just be quiet here for a moment while you maybe think about that. Okay, so I want to give you guys another lens for us to start thinking about how would we actually implement learning from this assessment. That's what I'm all about when I'm working with teams, is let's get to the practicals of how we can actually on a day-to-day basis make a difference in how we work together. This is the part that I think can really help teams and work groups in applying learning from this assessment. So first, if you and your team actually took this assessment, you would get, oh, sorry, there's a question in the chat. Yes, you have 2 of each of the 2 geniuses, 2 competencies, and 2 areas of frustration. So if you and your team fully took this assessment, the platform would be able to create what's called a team map for you. And Sarah's going to drop a blank one in the chat just so you can visually see what it looks like without any names in it. But what you would see there is that there's likely a trend in your team. Maybe there's an abundance of a couple of geniuses. Maybe there's a real deficiency in some area, like there's no one with a certain genius. Vice versa with frustrations. Maybe there's a lot of people that have an area of frustration, and so that creates gridlocks when you guys are working together. So let's break that down into talking about types of work conversations as another lens to look at that. And I can say that, so this is how, if I was debriefing with your team, this would be where we would really get into the meat of what can you guys do as a result of this learning. So there's 4 types of work conversations. The first is that when we're working together, there's usually a stage of brainstorming. This usually involves the genius of wonder, invention, and even discernment. Then there's a decision-making phase. This primarily is discernment, but it's also invention on the left side and galvanizing on the right. You're thinking of the visual. Then there's the launch phase. That's mainly galvanizing and enablement. Finally, there's status review and problem solving. Most people's meetings in general, this is what they're doing in their meetings, is status review and problem solving, meaning from a working genius standpoint, that's galvanizing and re-galvanizing when people lose momentum and energy and needing to reinvigorate energy into a project or an idea. That would be what re-galvanizing looks like. And then enablement and tenacity. So if we notice, oh, wow, this team has a real lack of genius in the wonder category, then we know we've got a brainstorming area that we can work on together. So how can we, as a team or a work group, be more intentional about that brainstorming phase? Or we don't have anyone with galvanizing. So how are we going to make sure that everyone's actually on board for this project in our unit, in our college, in the university as a whole, if we don't have somebody that's really good at that? So let me walk through some other ways we can look at working genius and how it might be helpful. One is that you're immediately, from what I just explained, you can tell you're understanding why there is a gap in effectiveness in the team through this assessment. It also provides a springboard for that conversation to eliminate that gap, per what I was just explaining through the work conversations. And if you're a manager, you can even bring this into an annual development conversation. If you have annual development conversations with your employees, this could be a cool way to apply that learning, make sure it really sticks, and make sure that you're a partner for your employees and helping them think about, how can I help you be able to use your geniuses more? And how can we think about your areas of frustration and what might alleviate some of that, quote, working genius, working frustration in your day-to-day work. If you are interested in thinking more about this assessment, let me give you first a very important link, which is in the chat, link to the book. That really is the first place to start for figuring out if you would be interested in this for your full team, if you manage a team, to look at the assessment more in depth and see some real practical examples in the book of teams that have applied this assessment. If you've ever read a Patrick Lencioni book, first of all, welcome to the club. I'm a big fan. He has a lot of amazing work that helps teams and organizations be more effective. And I use a lot of his work in the coaching that I do. And so he has a book for pretty much all of his models. 5 dysfunctions of the team is probably his most common. And so this working genius assessment that he and his organization created has a book with it. And so it's a pretty short book. I have it right here if you can see me on my screen. And they're really, honestly, they're 200 pages and they're super easy to read because it's told in story form before it introduces the model in short order at the back of the book. But that would be one way to figure out for sure that it's a good fit for your team. And also, of course, to actually take the assessment with your team. It's $25 a person on workinggenius.com. And then after everyone has taken it, you would use that team map. Again, you can see that in that PDF in the chat from Sarah. And that would help you chart where your team is. From there, then you can make adjustments for what geniuses are lacking or what frustrations are there in abundance. Some ideas. I think ideally, in a true ideal world, what you'd be able to do is reorganize roles and responsibilities as needed to allow people to better utilize their gifts. And I think at a small scale, that's absolutely doable if you have an open mind and you're leading a team or a work group. But even so, and let's get more specific about A&M here, how could we apply this learning? Well, maybe an area of frustration for you is, to ask yourself, have I ever asked my supervisor, have I ever asked a fellow team member or a student worker, like, do you have any interest in this kind of work? Or can you help me get better at this? Because this is not something that I love to do. And so there's a lot of opportunity for conversation there. Another thing you can do is, let's say there's somebody outside the team. Maybe they didn't take the assessment, but as you're hearing it talked about, you look more into it through the book, you say, oh, you know what? That person on that team that we work with sometimes, not every day, they're really good at invention. They're really good at coming up with ideas. So since our group isn't always as good at that, we could bring them in every now and then and ask their opinion on the ideas that we have, or to help us come up with ideas at all. And then we have a lot of discernment on our team, so we can refine those ideas once we have some of that idea generation from somebody who really loves to do that. And because if that's the case in this example I'm giving, somebody with a genius of invention, asking them to come up with ideas, they're energized by that. That's not a burden to ask them to do something that they love to do, that is probably going to be on their list of favorite things they did that day at the very end of the day. But absolutely, as it relates to A&M, I think thinking more creatively of things like, how can I, use student workers to help me with areas of frustration? And then how can I talk to my supervisor about how I can use this genius of wonder or genius of galvanizing more often? And what you're doing by raising that level of awareness with your coworkers or with your supervisor, or if you're the manager with your whole team, is you're really allowing the work and the organization as a whole to be more effective, right? Because people are more energized at the end of the day, they're more able to be more productive. And like I said at the beginning also, reducing frustrations means a reduce in burnout, possibly even. So there's a lot of opportunity for what you could do once you actually have your team map and can start to figure out what the insights are from that map. Again, there's a lot of treasures and examples in the Working Genius book. I will often work with teams to help them really unpack what's going on in their team. There's often a lot of aha moments, a lot of saying, I had never thought about it that way. A team that I most recently worked with had somebody who was in charge of finance, and we discovered they had a genius of wonder. And that is not a common genius for probably somebody running that part of an organization. And so to open up the conversation of how does somebody who has that genius and that kind of a role, how do we capitalize on that as a team? And that is a very important question that can not only help everybody on the team, but also give that person some flex and ability to try that, to really live into that genius, even though maybe their role and their job description doesn't sound like somebody who's constantly, quote, wondering, right? And so there was some really good insight and conversation through that, again, just more evidence of what this assessment can do to provide people with more confidence, I would say, and more energy around their work.